Yeah. Hi, my name is Robin B.
I'm Kay.
And I'm Will.
I thought you was gonna do
That's okay.
it's Will
We got
Flores
Will
TV.
Flores TV back again. We're doing part two of Where Are You From?
That's
So
right.
we're emphasize that, talking about childhood, going back into your old neighborhoods, if you possibly, and maybe reminiscing and seeing what you remember and things that change and that type of stuff. So we were talking about me and Kay. So now Will's going to talk about himself, and then we're going to do a generalization of what's going on. So Will, you tell us a little bit about you this time.
Yeah.
Part
So
two. We do have
yeah.
part one up.
So for me, I was born in the Bronx in Lincoln Hospital, as they say, stinking Lincoln. Um, but I
Lincoln
have no
Hospital has
memories of
changed
that.
tremendously.
Yeah, I had the memories of my first, obviously, first few years when I lived in the Bronx. My earliest memories is we lived in Harlem, growing up there. And the block where I grew up is where I mentioned it in the last video I did. Um, the block, they have one of the longest festivals, block parties in Harlem. It's called Old Timers Day, and the Southside bands come. The mayor comes every year, and I grew up on that block. So that was really something. Plus, I was raised on my grandmother and her father, so I had the wisdom was thick in the household where I was, and then the whole, like I said, with the Southside bands and the rich history, because my family had came to East Harlem in the 1920s. So you have a wave. It's called the Great Puerto Rican Migration, where waves of after Puerto Rico became a property of the United States in 1898. Shortly after that, you had waves of Puerto Ricans coming in for opportunity. So my family was one of the first ones to come through. My great grandfather was actually from Peru. He's an Afro Peruvian, actually. But that's where my name Flores comes from, by the way, but via Spain, obviously. But so anyway, just say that to say it was a rich history. So I grew up around this, the stories. My uncle, my great uncles, my grandmother's brothers, they were around. Slowly they died off as I was getting older. Not to get too morbid, but that was the reality of it. Unfortunately, drugs was prevalent. My grandmother, my grandfather didn't get along. But anyway, so I grew up. The history was rich, and I was constantly reminded of it. We would walk as I was a child, and my grandmother would say, "Look, back in 1930, this happened over here. There was this store here. Back in 1942, I remember the guys had a big fight on this corner, things like that." So, and then with my great grandfather, sometimes my grandmother would go to the hospital, and I would have to watch over the house. My great grandfather was turning senile, and one day I came to feed him, and I found him dead there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I was like around 14, me and my friends. So but anyway, and then a couple years after that, my grandmother passed. And I was going through a phase at the time. I was in high school. I was started, you know, I don't want to say hanging out with the wrong crowd, because I was hanging out with the same guys I grew up with, which I still hang out with now. But everybody kind of took a left turn towards the negative part of the neighborhood. So I got caught up in that. But I had some trials and tribulations, and luckily I learned from them, and I was able to get back on my good foot. A lot of people that I grew up around didn't, and there's so many traps. Even going back to with my uncles, with the street, the whole street life thing is such an allure because it's exciting. There's women there that are involved. There's money there. There's power. There's violence, and it's so attractive, especially when you come up in an area that's had a political disadvantage, and you find you sometimes you see no way out. We look at the politicians like they can't relate to us. We have no representation, so we formed our own world. We formed, and so you get caught up in that life. But it's tragic because you can die, you can lose your life at a young age. There's some people that didn't live to see 20 years old. So I grew up around a lot of that. It was very harsh. I put out a video called "How New York City Deteriorated in the '70s." You all want to check that out when you get a chance. And it's political. We're not going to get political now, but it's definitely political. But it was a culmination from the '70s, and when I came up in the early '90s, were the worst years. There was 2,000 murders a year in New York City. That's the worst that it's ever been. And I thank God that I was able to make it out of that. I didn't realize at the time. All these years later, I look back, huh?
In the '90s, that's when crack became prevalent.
Yeah,
And
it was in the
yeah,
'80s, but in the '90s, it came to a climax
yes,
in the
yes,
early
that's
'90s.
right. Because I was talking to you about before when where I lived at on T-Bat Avenue in my marriage years. There, it was just people selling weed and stuff. And when they came in with that, not even coke, it was crack. And when they came in with that, they would have feuds, and that's when you get your violence
Yeah,
stuff. And I was telling you, I was walking down the block, and a guy approached me, and the other guy, I think it was just a ploy for him to say something, and
right,
he jumped on the guy. He's like, "Does she look like she do that to you?" And then they started.
right.
And then it was a big feud. I got it away, of course. I don't even think it was about
Good
me.
for
I think it
you.
was just
Yeah,
about him
right.
having a reason to approach this guy. And it was really bad at that time. You're absolutely right. But that's
Yeah,
crack dealers, and because it was just weed. Nobody paid no attention to weed dealers.
right, right. When the crack came,
Yeah, that was
that was a
crazy.
whole other atmosphere. That was a whole other atmosphere. So, and it was crazy because some of my friends, their older brothers and things would start getting high, and sometimes they would steal stuff from out of the house. It was heartbreaking, but it was a hell of a time.
Yeah.
And even with all that said, it was still more of a sense of a community. Like when you go to back to the '60s and '70s, like you were saying on the last one, on part one, Karen, it was a huge level of community and respect, even though you had guys involved in crime. When I was coming up, not so much, but you still had it. Like if a
Mhm.
woman or a mother or a grandmother came by and guys were smoking or drinking, and if she came by, they would hide it. If somebody cursed around an older woman, some guy might smack him upside the head or like push him, like, yo, man, chill out, like, yo, watch your language or something like that. You don't have that anymore. You can look at for a reference for this. You can look at the movie Clockers, one of Spike Lee's movies, where he shows where the girl, the woman the mother comes down, and she's all in these guys' faces, hardest guys on the block, and they just stood quiet. You had that level of respect. Now, forget about it. They would, it's disgusting. It's disgusting. So you don't have that now. You're losing it as you move more and more into the future. That's why these conversations that we're having are so important because you have to be traditional to a certain degree. It's just I can't stress how important that is because we're losing the morality as we go further into the future. The technology is getting better, but it's like spiritually or rather psychologically, we're kind of degrading.
Mhm.
So it concerns me. So that's one of the things I hope to bring to as
Yeah,
a
but
service to humanity.
I agree with you because it's not even the older teenagers now, it's little kids that are so disrespectful. They're not learning. And I think that comes from their parents as well, because their parents are really not that old. So
Right.
they're learning from that. If their parents are not respectful to older people, I mean, like you said, stick to morale. You have to have something in you that said this is not right.
Right.
You know,
And we're
you have
losing
to
it.
have some kind of boundary, you
It's
know.
Yeah,
almost gone.
it's the sense of right versus wrong, that was instilled in you as a child that followed you throughout your life,
Right.
So you got to go back to the basics with it. You got to figure out what's right versus what's wrong, and instill that, the old ways sometimes were the better ways.
Yes.
Well,
Agreed.
yeah, exactly. And I know where I'm from too. I'm from the Bronx as well. And matter of fact, I was supposed to wear my Bronx hat, but I forgot.
Ah,
Yeah, Yankee hat on, but I truly forgot. I might put it
yo.
on.
Next time. Next time. Next time.
But anyway, yeah, like, when I was growing up too, if an older person was there, you automatically held the door. You automatically let them go into the elevator
Right.
first. You automatically let them do everything. You automatically help them if you saw them struggling on the street. You might,
Absolutely.
you might be doing the dirtiest thing in the world, or dirt, or running around and doing whatever, but you also acknowledge that person. And now they don't care. They'll slam the door in your face.
Yeah.
They'll turn around and say nasty things to you. I've heard that in the street with when I say little kids, I'm talking 10, 9 years old,
Right. No, I
8 years
know.
old, turning around and saying disgusting things.
Mhm.
So you know, you have to go back to how you grew, where you're from, and just concentrate on what you learned at that time. And maybe
And passing it down.
yeah, pass it down, please.
You
Please.
know, so
I mean,
that's my concern. That's
yeah.
my concern. And you look at, I think a lot of like I said, not to get political, but other communities usually can keep this intact over the years. It's like the quote unquote minorities. We tend to have issues with this for whatever reason. That's another conversation for another time. But blacks and Hispanics were notorious for this. But you look at other cultures and other ethnicities, and so it can be done. I'm just saying, it can be done. We can go back to having that frame of morality, and keep passing that down. And that's what we're doing here with the history, and that's how we're bringing it up now. People will hear this that have kids, and it'll give them an extra reminder to enforce that in their kids. They went through it, like you said. They're not that old. They came up in that. So why isn't it being passed down? Or why isn't it being? Maybe it is being passed down, but maybe it's not being enforced. And then you got to think of the youth now. They have a whole different mindset. It's different. The youth, how they think now, and how they operate now, and the things that they do, the things that they their mode of thinking. So that's something to consider as well, because the generations that keep going, they're losing it. For some reason, it's not being passed. I don't know why, but
Yeah, they are definitely.
parents had it, right? They had it.
I kind of think there's a theory behind that. When we were coming up, there were only certain channels. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So you had everybody was watching the same shows at the same time. So we were being programmed with the same stuff. So, Channel 7 on Thursday nights might have this show and everybody's tuned into it. I can go back to the Sweat Hogs and Welcome Back Kotter kind of thing, yeah. Where people were, this is what you did at night, after you did your homework or what have you, while you were doing your homework kind of thing. Right. And then the next day in school, you talking about that episode. But now you have thousands upon thousands of different ways to program people. It's not the same 2, 4, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13 that right. we had coming up. And some people only had 3 channels. Like I think Philly had maybe 3 and 5 and then UHF channels. You know what I'm saying? I
didn't know that. Wow.
So it was like, the programming was contained, and I'm taking it back to when, I'll take it back to when TVs first came in the home in the 50s and the 60s, before you were programmed by going to the movies on a weekend. And so right. You're like, this is the hot movie, so I'm going to emulate what I see in this movie. And there was good and bad in what you saw. So you got that lesson. Oh, stealing is bad. And you also knew that ratting out was bad. So you learn that I will not steal. You understand what I'm saying? We were getting the same kind of messages, but I think they've been diluted, and there's just way, way, way too many of them coming at you now.
Yeah, it's a bombardment. You're right. It's like overstimulus. It's like bombardment of stimulus, It's just...
Yeah, and the channels used to sign off at night. It's the Star Spangled Banner, then the test pattern, and to be resumed the next morning. So you didn't have 24 hours of energy or information coming at you from all different directions. I mean, the first time I went back to New York when they digitized all the billboards in Times Square and what have you, I was like, it's Futurama.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas we grew up like that. I remember going on 42nd Street. It was crazy. We used to go on 42nd Street like to look at the prostitutes.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, the peep shows, the game room.
That was like amazing to us. Like that was our bad thing,
Yeah.
We weren't even
Yeah.
doing it, but we were looking at it. So it was like,
Yeah.
oh man,
It
that's
was,
that's
Yeah.
and
And
that's
yeah,
the bad thing. Now that doesn't even phase nobody no more.
yeah.
It
yeah,
doesn't even matter. And like you were saying, Karen, about the TV, they even emphasize the fact they teach the violence.
Yeah.
There's no more good and bad. Now a bad could win. Like, okay, so
Yeah.
what's the repercussion? What is the punishment for doing this? There is
right,
none.
right,
And that's some of the stuff that comes toward them as well.
Yeah.
Whereas the movies and the shows that we used to watch, even the cartoons, the bad guys always lost.
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And that's why they did it. That's why they made it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's the subliminal programming and the actual programming. It's in our heads, and we're passing it down whether we know it or not.
Yeah, we are.
Our behaviors and stuff like that. But this generation coming up, like I said, they might be the generations where it's too much, where you've got to isolate them, put noise canceling headphones on with no sound. So they have 5 minutes of I'm listening to my own thoughts, or I'm listening to nothing.
Meditation.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's endless. You think about all the, like you said, the channels to 1 through 13. I don't know about in Jersey, Robin, you might remember this. When I was a kid, the cable channels, it was a dial, and after 13, it was letters A, B, C, D, E, F, G. I remember like HBO was like J, I think it was.
Was that the UFH channels or something? You had to turn the dial to a channel.
Yeah.
So
UHF, that was it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so think about now, they have endless Instagram accounts, YouTube channels, Twitter accounts.
You're your own personal programmer, and the computer, the algorithm is picking it up. You like this? I'm gonna give you 10,000 more of this. You don't like that? I'm not gonna give it to you. But we didn't have that choice. Whatever they put in front of us is what we had to consume.
Right.
And
then reading. We're not even gonna talk about that. Reading. It's like not even, that's why I always try to encourage. I always encourage luckily both my daughters are readers, thank God. I always encourage them, to read.
I like to read too.
Because your mind, processing the letters, I'm sorry, the letters, the numbers, the sentences, and you forming a picture in your head. It's just more cognitively engaging than watching something. Nothing wrong with watching a video, a documentary, but when you read it, it's a different experience. And it requires more gear turning, So
right.
Yeah. Reading requires your imagination too, because it's not being spoon fed to you. You come up with that image of what that person looks like, or what they're wearing, or their neighborhood, or what have you.
Right? No, absolutely.
And we've got to get back into our imaginations, because that's where the flexibility and the freedom is. It's not repeating what has been thrown at you, but actually coming up with something on your own.
Right.
No, 100%. Yeah, 100%. Like I say, like Einstein said, imagination is more important than knowledge.
Right.
Because you can have knowledge, but if you could imagine what could be, then you could make that happen or work towards making it happen.
Wow.
So,
that's deep. You guys are deep on this one. I love it.
Wait. And Dave Chappelle had the fix for learning how to read. He said you put on the closed captions, you turn the sound off.
Okay, I like that.
That's really cool.
That's a start.
You know what? I do that because I like foreign movies too. So I watched this whole Japanese movie. It was so good too, and I fell asleep on it.
Yeah.
I fell asleep. I was so pissed. I didn't know what happened at the end. My eyes got tired. I fell asleep, and I didn't even know what happened. But anyway, that's a good thing, though. I like that image. Yeah.
That is. It's a start. It's a start.
My granddaughter turned this down. She's like, "What happened? What happened? What happened?" I was like,
"Read
how to read.
Read it.
No, you gotta get her a book. You got to get her a book, even if it's an ebook.
She got books. She got books.
You can send an ebook as a gift too.
Yeah, she has books. She has plenty of books.
Okay, that's good. That's good then. That's on the right track.
Yeah. Reading, writing, arithmetic.
There we go. 3 R's, right? 3 R's.
Does anybody even know what that is under the age of 15?
Probably not.
No, I don't think so.
It's went the way of cursive.
Oh, yeah.
And analog clocks, right?
Yeah, I
The
saw something
analog
about that.
clocks.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and stereos with the
Yes.
they don't know how to. I told you about my son, and he was old and he didn't know how to drop. My mother had given me the stereo, didn't know how to
Vinyl.
drop the
Yeah.
record down on the turntable. They know how to scratch on a turntable, but they didn't know how to drop it
That's
down.
weird. Oh
I
man.
couldn't believe it. But I wasn't thinking.
Yeah, it still amazes
Or
me.
a dial telephone.
Yeah.
Or
We're
when
like
you took your
dinosaurs.
phones and you had to get off the phone because somebody was screaming at you, I want to use the phone now.
Uh-huh.
No, please.
We're like dinosaurs,
Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
And
Well,
we're
no,
not that old. That's
we
just
are
how
time.
fast the technology has increased.
Yes,
We've seen so much in the
we
last
are time travelers. We have
Yeah.
seen the past
Yeah.
and the future.
yes.
I'm grateful to be born at such a time we could see both.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, we've seen
definitely.
a lot. But anyway, we're going to end this. Thank you so
Yeah.
much. Please give us your comments. Give us where you're from. Give us your experiences.
Right.
Because a lot of people, you go back and you have that nostalgia and you see and you feel what you used to do. Yeah, give us the comments. Will Flores TV, you go on his channel
Right.
as well.
Yep.
And of course the chatter and join us. And I'm grateful to have you guys come back and to listen to
Thank you.
Please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you so much for being with us once again. Bye-bye.
Bye.